Hello, welcome to another Entity Framework Community Stand-Up. I'm here with Jeremy and Shay from the EF team, and also with Erik EJ, a non-resident but SQL Server expert who comes on quite frequently here. We're going to go over our usual state of the unicorn and other stuff, and then Erik is going to talk to us about all of the cool stuff in EF Core Power Tools, reverse engineering and migration stuff as well, right, Erik?
Yes.
Yes, cool. So let's get started with the state of the unicorn. Sorry, that was the wrong button. Here we go. EF Core 6.0 Preview 2 is on NuGet now. It's as always with previews. Let me find. Sorry. Here we go. I just wanted to show you, if you want to know what's new in any of our previews, then you can go to our What's New in EF Core 6 page, where we provide examples and details about the new things. And these examples are not necessarily what we put in the docs. They actually kind of talk about what's specifically different and new. We made free sections more flexible by allowing you to pass things into it that aren't a string. So, for example, if you're mapping a name class to strings in your database, you can use name class in free text search now. We've got better integration with system link async. You don't get the same namespace collisions that you get now. We've had pull requests to translate string concat with multiple arguments on SQL Server, so better query stuff. And we're also now, we changed to not preserve the synchronization context in EF Core 3.0, so that's configure 8 false everywhere. We're making a flip back to doing it in save changes, because in that case, sometimes we call back into your entities, which might make notifications that need to run with the same context, like on a UI thread, for example. So we made that change. And that's what's new in EF Core 6, so get that from NuGet now. Also this week, there's been a flurry of activity. Well, there's actually been activity over the last 6 or so months on NodeTime support for EF Core. And the result is we now have packages out there that support NodeTime on SQL Server, PostgreSQL, and SQLite. Shay, do you want to talk a little bit about NodeTime?
Sure. So I'm guessing a lot of the spectators don't know what NodeTime is. So just a couple of words about it. NodeTime is a datetime package that kind of replaces or can be used to replace the BCL types, the types that everybody knows and possibly loves that come with .NET. So I'm talking about like datetime offset, stuff that everybody knows. NodeTime does these things, but better. I'm saying this pretty categorically. There's why, let's say, the datetime and datetime offset types were done a long time ago, way back, and when .NET was initially started. There are some fundamental design issues with the way these types are done. They make it very hard to work correctly with more complex datetime scenarios where you actually are dealing with dates and times in different time zones. You need to convert between them. This is stuff that the native types that you get in .NET actually don't work that well. For example, there's not even a type to say to represent a date and a time in a particular time zone. A lot of people think datetime offset is that, but there's a very big difference between an offset and a time zone. For example, for people who actually know about this, there's daylight savings and things like this. Basically, there's a lot of complicated stuff with datetime handling that you can't really do very well with .NET. And NodeTime is kind of like a library that implements things in the right way, that separates types correctly, that does the proper, let's say, abstractions or design of things. So what I usually say is if your application actually does need to do anything complicated with dates and times and deal with time zones and deal with, leap seconds in this year or that year, like the actual correct kind of stuff, it's really worth taking a look at NodeTime. Now, how is this relevant to database and EF Core? Up to now, I've just talked about the, like in general, datetime logic. What we've wanted to do for a long time is to allow you to map to your database, to talk to your database with NodeTime instead of using the .NET type. So when you're mapping, let's say, an EF entity class, instead of putting a datetime property on there and mapping that to a database date or time or timestamp column, the idea is that you're using NodeTime types now to represent that because they're better, pretty frankly. So you can basically do this now. So this is not official support. These packages that Arthur was just mentioning is not like official support from, it's not something that we deliver as the EF Core team, but you have community package that do this job very well. So if you're using SQL Server, for example, now recently a community package has appeared that there's even two, if I remember correctly, that allow you to, there's a plugin, there's another NuGet that you kind of add. It's very simple. And then you can start mapping those, those NodeType types instead of datetime and datetime offset. Exactly. Thank you very much. So there's a package for SQL Server. There's a package for SQLite. There's also been a package for Postgres, like for a very long time now, for a couple of years. And these things allow you to basically forget about datetime and datetime offset when mapping dates and time types to the database via EF Core. So that's enough about, I'm not going to spend more time about this. If you're doing complicated stuff, datetime is always complicated. If you're doing complicated stuff with it, I'd really recommend taking a look at NodeTime. I've personally had a lot of trouble over the years. Whenever you actually do date and time and you think, oh, that's super simple, right? Dates and times, right? Everybody does it. It's all very simple, right? Anybody who's actually programmed dates and times like a little bit know that this is like one of the most tricky, horrible parts of software engineering, in fact. So, yep, that's it.
Absolutely. So all I did here was search for NodeTime EF Core and NuGet, and 4 packages show up here. We'll also put a link to this in the show notes. Beyond Shay's great technical explanation, I think this is also a good example of where we're going with extensibility and the ecosystem with EF Core. So NodeTime is not from Microsoft. It's by John Skeet, I believe, and it's been around for a long time. So that's already, community ecosystem types. And now we have these packaged also by the community, which connect EF Core up to NodeTime. So we're really building like an ecosystem of stuff here without EF Core team having to implement these things. What we do plan to do on the EF Core side is add to our specification test suite a bunch of tests for NodeTime, which can then be implemented by the various providers and extensions such that we can test that there's a consistent experience. So I say we're going to do that. the community may come in and do that. So if you're interested in writing some NodeTime tests, then jump on the repo and find the issue and write a comment, and we'll see what we can do. But yeah, we hope to make this a really good first-class experience with EF Core, but building on the community packages. So switching back to State of the Unicorn. Let's look at some of the current work we're working on. SMIT is currently steaming away on EF6 query parity, looking at all of those group join things that we still haven't done, even the ones that are debatable about the translation, whether it's good or not. We're getting there. We're gonna miss some cases here. So if you try the previews, probably not a great, you could try now, but we haven't done a lot of this work yet. But certainly as we move on, trying the previews, and if you have queries that don't translate on EF Core and that they do translate on EF6, then let us know so that we can keep track of that stuff. In addition, Andrew has been working on the compiled model, and we've just merged yesterday is a convention that automatically builds an optimized runtime model. So previously we would build a model, which is what was happening in our model creating, and then that model that got built in our model creating, that was what was used for the rest of the time that your application ran. But that model is really not optimized for runtime read-only access that you need it when you're using the model. It's optimized for being able to build it. So now we have when you finalize the model, so after our model creating finishes and we build the model, we actually build an optimized model which is designed for being fast at runtime reading EF Core metadata. So that's super exciting that's coming. I don't have any perf numbers to show if it gained or anything. I'll talk to Andrew about that and see where we get to. Okay, doc of the week this week is the .NET EF tool reference. So Erik EJ is going to talk about EF power tools. And so that's where you want to go if you're on Windows and you're using Visual Studio. But I just wanted to point out that for those of you using the command line, we have this tools reference. And if you're ever trying to figure out what options there are, so there's some general information about what it means to run in different environments, but then we have all of these things, including the common options. So for example, verbose, all the tools have verbose, so if it's going wrong, you can get better output. There's a no build. This can be useful. We want to make sure that your project is up to date when we do things. Otherwise, we'll do the wrong thing in a lot of cases, but that can be problematic. So there's a no build option if you need it to run even without doing the build first. And then all of the different database commands here, we have the options for how you do all of these things, reverse engineering, migrations commands, and so on and so forth. So this reference is all there. So if you're struggling to figure out what options you need in your tools, come to the doc page for here, and it's under command line reference. And with that, I think we can move over to Erik and start learning about the power tools.
Thank you, Arthur. Yes, as you said, I will present some of the new features. After giving a little bit of an overview of Power Tools, I will present some of the new features that has been introduced in EF Core Power Tools, many of them by community members, not by me, but I have a very vibrant community that very passionate about contributing to this project, which is delightful, of course. So let's quickly walk through what is EF Core Power Tools for those of you that don't know already. The Power Tools were launched in 2017. It's a Visual Studio extension that allows you to do reverse engineering, basically on top of those command line tools that Arthur just pointed, the documentation of which I just pointed to. It can do model visualization, and it also has a migration tool. It's community driven. I'm the project maintainer, but I get many pull requests from the community. It's open source, it's free and available on GitHub, of course. And I think there's a link to the tool in the URL links for this show. Here's a mission statement for the tools. I will not get into detail for that. So in this presentation, I will focus on the new reverse engineering features because that's apparently where people would like to contribute new features, not because that's where the most interest is. So first, let's have a little bit of a look on how it works. As you may know, EF5 is a .NET Standard 2.1 library, so it doesn't actually run under .NET Framework. And as you may also know, that Visual Studio is a .NET Framework 32-bit application. So in order to make this work, the power tools actually consist of two parts, and that's what I've been trying to visualize in my hopeless drawing here. So at the top we see a Visual Studio, and then on the right, to the right of it, we see something that should represent power tools now being installed, and it's basically a DLL file that is loaded in process with Visual Studio. And then the power tools actually distribute in a zip file a command line tool that that has a JSON-based interface. So if I send it a JSON configuration file, it will reply back in a undocumented contract that the power tools know between each version of this command line tool. And then that command line tool then references the various NuGet packages that represent the individual provider packages for the various databases that the tool supports, which includes Oracle, SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, and of course SQL Server and Azure SQL Database.
Awesome stuff. So the communication with Visual Studio is always one of those things that can be challenging. I know Bryce has worked on many versions over the years of trying to make that that reliable. Do you have any tips for people who want to do that kind of thing?
Yeah, I use just standard input and output, but you have to do certain to all the errors and so on, and still I fail. I try to do a lot of pre-checks because this command line tool actually requires .NET Core 3.1 runtime to be installed in order to run. So I try to upfront perform some checks to verify that the user actually has this this runtime installed, because it may not be present on all developer machines. So it is a hard thing to do. Yeah, so I'm using just standard input output, because then I don't have any intermediary files
Keep
that
it
I
simple.
need yes, exactly, to keep it simple.
Yeah.
But I know there's other inter-process mechanism, but I think that this works quite well for me in my scenario, actually.
I think if you look at where Bryce's code has gone over the years, it's gone to let's keep this as simple and easy as possible, and then move the code on to either side of it to handle complexity rather than
and the advantage for me, of course, is I distribute the tool together with any version of the power tools. So I'm completely free to change the protocol at any point in time, because I control both ends of the wire, so to speak.
Exactly.
Many people, or some users, not many people, some users have asked, why can't we run this as a command line tool? And I say, yes, you can, but you actually can, but it's undocumented. Because it will be a big burden for me to actually publish, to actually support a documented API for that command line tool.
Yes.
On top of what I'm doing already.
Yep.
So yeah. But just to give some insight about the challenges in this world, where we have the old world of .NET Framework and the new world of .NET Core, and of course, for developer convenience, we want them to talk to each other. Yes. So the first feature I will show is reverse engineering SQL Server database project. And why is that important? Because we can reuse the schema description from a database project without actually having a live database running even on the developer machine. So that will give a very short inner loop. When you're doing schema changes, you basically just alter the create table script in the database project, and then you can immediately generate the DbContext that matches this table statement without having to deploy to a database or change the schema of a running database. So how do you do that? You just simply point to the project or dacpac file in a data source selection when you run the reverse engineering visit. And let's have a quick demo of that. First, I'm going to add a database project to my solution here. So I'm just going to search for database, SQL Server database project. Create. And a database project is a description of the desired state of my database, and Microsoft has then created tooling and command line tools and APIs that can look at a running database and this desired state of the database and bring that running database into the state I desire that is described in this database project. And how do you populate a database project? You can actually import it from a database. So I will just connect to my SQL Express instance. And then select my Chinook database. So you can basically import an existing legacy database as a start, but you can also just start by creating a number of scripts inside the project.
So, question for you, Erik. When you're working locally with SQL Server, do you use Express as opposed to local DB? And if so, why?
I tend to switch between the two, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I needed Express because I would like to keep local DB, but I wanted Express with the 2019.
Yeah.
So that was an easy way for me to try out some of the new features on the SQL Server 2019 locally.
It's updating local DB is not a trivial thing, unfortunately.
Exactly, that was my experience. I would and it will give all kinds of headaches.
Yes.
Because it will give headaches and conflicts with Visual Studio. So I just decided to go with SQL Express and be able to update that.
Yes.
And I think actually even patching local DB is a no-go. So if and there was at one point in time there was some issues with local DB and EF Core, which caused it to be like a no-go option in various scenarios, like when you ran create database. So
yeah.
So I will add a console application to this project as well. So we can generate some code inside it. Let's go for 5. Yes. So now I'm creating just a console app that we can push some code into with the power tools. So the database project now contains create table statements that represent the tables in the schema in has a nice designer, a grid-based designer, and a corresponding script file down here. And then in the console app, I will now run Power Tools, reverse engineering, and I can point. It actually selected the database project for me already, so it's located this in my solution.
So it looks through the solution for basically for dacpac projects, right?
Yes, exactly, and it will list them here in this drop down. If you have a dacpac somewhere on your hard disk, you can just point to it with this add. So it add in any external dacpac, but it will look in the solution for any database projects.
And the top box there was for if you just want to point it to a connection and go directly from the database.
We will do that we will do that in the next next demo. We'll go directly to a live database instead. Cool. So I would just select to include all the tables. Yeah, just include all the tables in this. I will put it in Chinook folder here in my project. So this is a folder inside the project where the code will be generated.
So I can change a bunch of options here as well, right?
You can change many options here. We will briefly touch upon them, and if you don't think there's enough options here, you can have some more here.
More options.
Yes, we want more options.
That's like turning the dial to 11.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like when you run out of screen real estate, what do you do?
Every
Yes.
time somebody asks us, can you add this option to the reverse engineering tool?
Yeah.
Regardless of whether we say yes or no or put it on the backlog, the next day Erik usually replies say, "Oh, I've just added that to the power
Yeah,
tools."
or it's already
there. Yes.
Initial reply. Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice in the
So,
advanced thing that there was experimental support for nullable reference types. That's very nice.
There is, yes, but I don't know if it works. But yes, if somebody's
It's
trying.
experimental. Just
And there's
throw it in
actually
there, see what happens.
there's also support, by the way, for mapping NodeTime types.
Nice.
Awesome.
I don't think I've added the SQL Server support yet because it's brand new, but it's enabled for MySQL and Postgres, and it will.
I remember we had back and
for
forth on this.
SQL Server as well. Sorry, Shay, you were saying?
No, I remember we had some back and forth on Postgres NodeTime support. Now I remember.
Yeah. It took me a while to figure out how to get it right. Yes. So
Very
maybe
cool.
we should just do this one more time and just try to understand exactly what's going on here.
Without the annoying
now
EF people continuously interrupting.
I selected the database here because we now know that we have this database project. So now I'm calling the command line tool and saying inspect the schema of this dacpac file, and that was so the command line tool has now returned something that describes the schema that I can now display in this nice tree view community contribution, of course, because I don't know anything about WPF. Let's put it in a folder again. And let's include the EF provider package and hope that the internet is with us today. Yes. So now we got all the files generated in NodeTime, and I think what is happening in the background is that the entity framework SQL Server package is gently is able to compile a project. So I will not show how to use this DbContexts. It's using is just like you're using any other DbContext. So that was reverse engineering.
Very cool.
Switch back to the sites. And a bonus info, it's also possible to do this with an EF6 EDMX that targets SQL Server. Yes, believe it or not, somebody from the community did this. It has some rough edges, but it actually works.
This is something that we get asked for, quite a lot. So
I see it infrequently. Yes. Sometimes yes.
Yes.
So that is actually opening up a path for. Yes, I'm stuck on an EF6 EDMX, and this tooling just needs the XML file. It doesn't need anything else. So if you have an EDMX floating around somewhere, you can just point the tool to the same way you do with a dacpac file. Just go into the add dialog and point to the EDMX file, and then you will get a DbContext generated. But it's very targeted at the SQL Server type specific EDMX, which is probably not. It's probably a good target. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, EDMX itself was sort of maybe a little bit SQL Server oriented in itself.
A little bit SQL biased, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, biased is a good word here. But then this actually looks like if I were to try to port an EF6 project to EF Core, this now looks like possibly like the right way to start. So there's like the alternative of reverse engineering.
It also depends what you have on top of your DbContext, I would say. So what other code you have on top of that. But certainly I know many projects where this would be a lifesaver. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we typically tell people is to reverse engineer again from the database created by your EF6 or mapped to your EDMX, and that does work. However, I'm assuming certain things about what Erik's tool does here, but the EDMX contains a bunch of mapping information that obviously isn't in the database, such as what you've renamed properties and columns
Exactly.
to, and so
Exactly.
preserving
If you
that is
rename
going to be very
tables
useful.
and properties, and that information will be carried through here.
Uh-oh.
We lost Erik.
Yeah.
Oh no,
So,
it's back.
bonus. Sorry.
We
I'm
lost
back.
you for a
Yes,
minute.
it seems a little bit shaky.
Yeah, we had this.
Sorry. So,
Oh, go ahead.
you lost me again. Yes.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I was just going to
Okay,
say
good.
we had this question come in. What happens if things go wrong? Is there an output window? Is there a log file?
Yes, it will. Anything that goes wrong will display in the output window in Visual Studio, and I will also. I will also say a message box say errors occurred during reverse engineering. Please check the output window.
Nice.
Basically the same way it's done in the EF6 tool.
Great.
Yes. Yeah. So any errors that come back from the command line tool are also carefully not carefully handled, but at least carefully shared. So yes. So both the dacpac and the MDMX reverse engineering features are actually available as NuGet packages, so you can use them with .NET EF, not only my tooling.
Very nice.
Yes.
I think we need some updated documentation here.
Next feature, rename tables. So why is that useful? Yes, we talked about it already. Maybe you have some old legacy database where everything is called TBL, user TBL, invoice TBL, whatever, and you don't want to have a look at that in your code base. So one option is now that you can actually rename tables with Power Tools. And how do you do it? You simply press F2 on the table name and object selection dialog, and it gets persisted in a config file in the project that can go into source control.
That would have been great on the project I worked on where every table name was prefixed TBL, and then you could only have 6 characters to name the table. And there are hundreds of these.
So we're going to do that based on a live database. So now I'm going to again into Power Tools reverse engineering, and then I'm going to this top where I can actually add database connections, and I will add one because we don't have any up front. So I will point to my Express instance again, and then select the famous Northwind database, of course. So instead of reverse engineering from a dacpac, I will actually reverse engineer from a live database that is running on my SQL Server Express instance. Let's start by selecting all the tables and all the views, and then let's take something. I'm just pressing F2 now. And then I'm able to reverse engineer this renaming. So we will just proceed here, and we will not. So you can see it's kind of conflicting with the existing config file here. We'll see how we can solve that later. And we'll put it in the Northwind folder. Instead of having it here. And we already have the provider package installed, so we don't need that again. So views in Northwind, and they're here. And so you can see down here we have this renamed table, and it has a table. Am I using?
Very nice.
Apparently I chose. Yeah, and this is actually persisted in this config file here. So if you want to do bulk renaming, you can. There's options to modify this file on your own. You can create a tool to do the renaming if you want to do bulk renaming for whatever reason. But there's also the possibility to actually do regex-based renaming of tables and columns.
Whoa!
As part of this configuration file. I will not go into details because I'm not I don't know anything about regex, to be perfectly honest, but it's technically possible because somebody from the community actually contributed this feature.
So
it's like everybody with every developer with regex person, pretty much, where you learn what you need when you need to use it, and then you forget again, and then next time you learn it again.
When you blissfully forget everything about it. Yes.
So
Ignorance
here's a
really
question
is bliss.
for you.
Yes.
How does reverse engineering handle table names that are the same in different schemas?
How does reverse engineering handle that is exactly what this renaming feature is for, actually.
Okay. So you would basically
one
target.
Of the reasons why, so you can target either this, you have legacy names, or you can target, I want to include both tables, but I want to call one of them something else.
Got it.
Yes. So this is actually also possible to some extent to rename navigations. This JSON file I just showed you before, it actually also supports renaming of navigations. Is a little bit, or maybe I should just say quite hacky and experimental, because you actually need to know what the final name, the EF core currently generated name of the navigation will be before you can rename it to something else. Because at this point in time where we're showing the tables, we have no idea what the navigations will be called.
So navigations are interesting in the sense that they are totally an artifact of your C# code and don't exist in the database at all.
Exactly.
And so that makes it actually quite challenging to come up with good patterns for naming them. Typically, you either want to do it by the types, which works in simple cases like blog and post, but doesn't work in cases where there are multiple relationships like employee, manager, customer, that kind of thing. Or you want to use the foreign key constraint, but that's often not named very usefully. So so we're kind of grasping for straws often when we create names for navigations. So being able to rename them is often very useful.
Yeah, and it's a feature request I've had for 2 years. And I finally this year pulled myself together to figure out some way to do it. It is, as I said, hacky because you need to know in advance what the resulting name will be from reverse engineering, but you are actually able to do it. It's documented on the wiki how you do that. So next logical step, of course, is rename columns. Again, all these features I'm showing at the moment, they're the community contributions. The UI for them, the community contributions. I'm pretty amazed. Yes. So again, rename columns, same problem. You would like some more user-friendly, instead of everything being called col, this, that, and the other. Maybe you want some more user-friendly names for them since they're in your C# classes eventually.
The worst column names that I've seen.
So how do you do it? Well, yes, like before.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Erik. I was just going to say the worst column names that I've seen recently is ones that where one column was named single space and another column was named 2 spaces. So that's legal in SQL Server. Don't do that.
Yes. That's a wide range of valid column and table names in SQL Server. Yes.
Just because it's valid doesn't mean it's good, right?
Yes.
Not if you want to use it in like a strong type language like C#, for example.
Yes.
So yes. So let's just quickly see how that's done. But it's essentially the same experience as before. You can simply press F2 on. Let's check this one. I don't know why I didn't pick that one already. So let's go to this same table where we did some renaming, and we will just call this. I press F2. Just call it test instead. So okay, and renamed. Now has a test column instead of this test bool column. And again, of course, this is persisted in this JSON file, and goes into source control and all the nice goodies. So, yes. Okay, sorry, I blew myself there before. The bonus is you can also do a regex to do pattern-based renaming.
Wow.
But seriously enough, I mean, I'm guessing this is a very common scenario when there's some sort of like legacy naming scheme called this or that, where a regex actually makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
This works in my mind. Like, it makes sense.
Absolutely, I think. Yeah, and then of course you can have the regex replacements, and then you can override if you have a special table that actually has a sensible name, but you still want to rename it. You can override that by being more specific via this config file.
That sounds like some job security to me. You do some complex regex table and column renames, and
you only have to do it once.
I'm just saying you could get pretty creative with it, though.
Oh yes, oh yes. So there's also the option to exclude columns. And why would you want to do that? For example, if you have like columns that relate to like row GUID columns in SQL Server that relate to replication, you may not want to have them in your C# classes. Or if you want to remap a column to an enum, for example, you can create a Prechecks class that maps the underlying column to an enum and then ignore the column that represents the enum value. So this is very much, of course, a database first problem.
So typically with enums now we have pretty good mapping for them directly, so it's unlikely you would want to use that.
Yes, but the problem is how would the EF Core Power Tools reverse engineering from a database know anything about enums in your database?
It needs to have another entry in that nice JSON file that says this is implemented by this enum.
Potentially, yes.
And a regex to say which naming scheme is an enum.
Exactly. I have seen some suggestions in that direction, but yeah, it's not implemented yet.
Well, you could assume, now, jokes aside, technically, if you see a check constraint of a certain type, maybe that could be an enum, but I'm really just making fun here.
You're fishing, yes.
Yes.
I'm fishing.
I'm looking forward to a pull request from you, Shay.
Yeah. No, that's...
Never mind. So how do you do
Never
it?
mind, indeed.
You simply uncheck the column when you again in this very, very nice tree view we now have of the database structure that was created by an Italian MVP who's very, very good at WPF. So let's go down to this renames. We actually don't even. Is this a good example? I'm not sure. We don't want the picture in the categories.
So typically you would only, I mean, unless you're going to map it in another way, like Erik was saying with the enum, you would typically only want to do this with nullable columns, because essentially otherwise EF is will fail when it's trying to insert. Or you could do it for read-only also, I suppose.
Yes, and we recently discovered that you can't actually do it for foreign key columns either, because that would completely break the model.
Yeah.
So it is. You can put yourself in a corner here, but if you know what you're doing, you can take advantage of this. If you have very special requirements in terms of how you want to shape something that is still completely reversed engineered from a database, I think that's the main usage criteria for this feature. And I agree, there's definitely a room for many pitfalls in this area.
Yep.
So we just saw how it was done. Also, bonus info, you can actually use a regex to filter the objects in the dialog. So here we can choose between use text search to search for something in this dialog, and use a regular expression to filter objects that's selected in this dialog.
Very nice.
You know, it's crazy that we have databases with so many tables and columns that you even have to have that as an option. But I can imagine some of these dialogues are big.
It is some. I've seen some, and it's like you can hardly see this scroll bar. You can just see a tiny bit of it at the top. and they show the screenshot there, like I have 1,500 tables or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's
thousands of tables is comes up more often than is good for the world.
Indeed. So now we have this. We noticed that we had this issue that we kind of conflicting with the same config file for two different. We now have a library, a console app with two DbContexts inside it, and I know that's kind of an anti-pattern, but I just did it, so it's quite easy to do.
Sure.
So you can. So how can you fix that? You can actually move the config file to another place in the project, or you can rename it to be more specific to that particular context. So this one, and then actually currently there's a little bit of a pull request coming up. We say we should do the same for the renaming file, so that's actually not working now, but it will be coming in the next release. There's a pull request in from somebody in the community for that already. So let's forget about the renaming file for now. So we can copy this to the Northwind folder. So it's specific for Northwind, and then we can run the reverse engineering again. So now and make it specific for. So now we actually get a dialog that says which one do you actually want to use for this particular session of the reverse engineering tool. So we'll use this one and modify it to work with database project. Yes.
I can see that this would be very useful when you're splitting your database into multiple bounded contexts, and you want to only exclude certain entity types, and that's another case where you might exclude properties in one of your bounded contexts.
Yeah, but you would still want to have it in inside this same class library or X file or whatever. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's move it to the Chinook folder. So now we have now we have two config files, one that's specific for Chinook and one that's specific for Northwind. The one here at the root is a config file that's specific for Chinook context and contains a list of all the tables in Chinook, etc. And the other one is for Northwind, and it's actually inside the Northwind folder here, just to isolate it here. So, and you can actually, I initially made this feature simply by the fact that you can rename them, so call them efpc .chinook.config.json. There's also that option available. If you want these config files at the root of your project, multiple config files in the same folder, you can differentiate them by naming instead. And we're working on similar support for the renaming file. So thanks to recent community PR, you can now with placing it anywhere in the folder system, that's also a community PR.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. So recently I got another community PR. Right-click, refresh, edit. So to launch reverse engineering, you can actually right-click the config file in the in the project and just run it. So you can either refresh, which will actually just run it as it is. But if you have made any column changes, for example, I think it's mainly applicable for column changes, type changes to column or added new columns, it will actually just regenerate, run the code generation without having to go through the wizard of selecting stuff and all that, selecting options, because it would
very
just
nice.
The existing options. So you basically just right-click the file in Solution Explorer and run it. So let's try. So we have.
So
this
that
new
sounds
menu.
very useful for an iterative kind of when you're continuously kind of reverse engineering again and again. That sounds like extremely useful.
So yes, and if you're sitting with a database project, it will probably be even more useful.
Yes.
So we just the edit option will basically just launch the wizard with that config file already pre-selected, instead of having going through this drop down where you have to select the config file. And refresh will basically completely run the reverse engineering process based on the current selection in the config file. But let me just show you one little tweak to that. So if I go in here, I will select this one, which is the one for Chinook. It's actually, yeah, that's a good reason for that. So let's take this one. And it persists at the table selection. We will go to the next, and now we will dive into this horrible array of checkboxes here. I'm sorry about it. But there's an interesting option here in this context saying always include all database objects. And that means that instead of having to go through the list of selecting new tables, because that's how the tools currently work, when you add a new table, you actually have to opt into add it to the context. If you enable this option, it will include everything that is in the source database, everything. And when I say everything, I mean views, tables, and for SQL Server functions and stored procedures.
Very nice.
So we just saw that. Yes, and the advanced option is very useful in this context because you can just, so if you're sitting, like you said, Shay, if you're sitting working and continuously iterating over a database, either a live database or a database project, then this will give you a very quick update of the DbContexts simply by right-clicking and selecting refresh. Yes. The last thing I'm planning to show is mapping of SQL Server stored procedures. I saw there was a question about it already on the chat. So and recently I've also added scalar functions. So
nice.
Yeah. Why is that useful? Yes, to be able to get stored procedure results using the familiar EF Core APIs as an extension of the way that you are querying your DbContexts. But of course, stored procedure results, you cannot link query them unless you actually get the whole result into memory and start working with it there, unfortunately. And you can actually also use the scalar UDF functions in linked queries easily. So you don't have to do manual mapping of the scalar UDF functions. Power tools will just do that for you.
So I think that's one thing that people coming from EF6 are maybe not aware of. So in EF6 you could run raw SQL queries, but we didn't have the equivalent in EF6 of from SQL, which allows you to start with some SQL that you've written and then compose on that with link. So for example, you can start with something that uses a UDF and then put a where clause and a skip and a take and everything, and that will work. So that's actually a very powerful part of EF Core that doesn't come in EF6. But in order to do that, it can't be a stored procedure result because SQL Server doesn't allow you to compose over the stored procedure result. So you have to use a UDF or so some other kind of SQL.
Yes. So I'm not returning iQueryable results. The tool returns lists of results from stored procedures. So that's just how it works.
Yeah.
So there's also now in EF Core 5 the table, the TVF, the table returning basically UDF. So you can write a function that returns a result set, right? And that you can compose over.
Yep.
You can actually use that.
A table value function. Yeah, that's
a TVF exactly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I haven't done mapping of those yet. I think it's a bit more involved than just mapping scalar functions. And I think you need objects. Potentially, you need objects server side as well. So, yeah. So, how do you do it? You select the stored procedures and the scalar functions that you wish to map. And let's just have a look at how that's done and what the result of it is. So now we have X number of files, and each of these files represent a table in Northwind. There's nothing about stored procedures here yet because we haven't done anything with those yet. We decided not to select them. So we go in, go on to reverse engineering, choose the Northwind one. I don't know why it's this one. And so part of this list is also the stored procedures. Let's just pick a couple. These are classical Northwind stored procedures plus some test ones from me. You see the various variations of test stored procedures. And also, I think we have a couple of functions here. So let's just include those as well. And that's it. Now you are able to use stored procedures and functions directly, like C# classes and the methods in code. So
Very cool.
Very cool. Yes.
We'll just add these, and 3 seconds later, we have all our stored procedures mapped essentially. So how is this implemented? The functions is actually an extension of the context, because that's how powerful the function mapping is in EF Core. So you can actually call this as you can use this method as a part of a link query. So I've chosen this static methods inside the DbContexts itself. So I extended it with this Northwind context.functions class.
So for people who haven't seen this before, this function mapping, this is what we use to map common SQL Server functions, date diff type stuff. But also, you can write your own function mappings. So you can write your own function mappings to already existing built-in SQL Server functions that are not mapped by default, or you can create your own functions and map them this way. So this kind of creating a stub here, and the reason these throw not supported exception is because the idea here is that you never actually call these from your code directly, right? You use them in a link query that gets translated into SQL, but they're not intended to they're just a placeholder to let you build that link query. This is a very powerful feature
a strong type to
yes
hang on to.
Yeah.
And currently I only map scalar stored procedures. That means the scalar functions. That means functions that return a single primitive type, I suppose, is one word for it, like an int or a string or something in that region, not complex objects.
But as Shay was saying earlier with the TVFs, you can also use this similar thing to map TVFs, even though it's not in the reverse engineering yet. You can write these yourself and use TVFs.
It's definitely possible with the EF5, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's even a particularly advanced but cool kind of thing you can do is you can actually map a DB set. You can actually have a DB set and say when the user queries that DB set, that actually means that we should be calling that function, that TVF. So it's like a function that could also be seen. It's not dissimilar to a view, which is again another database type thing that's going to return stuff. You can map to a view, you can map to a TVF, you can map to a table, of course. So these things are like new things in EF Core 5, which I'm sure will appear in EF Core Power Tools like very, very soon.
I'm sure they will very, very soon. Yes. And
very
you
soon.
and all those three you mentioned, you can actually compose over those.
Exactly.
So
because they're not stored procedures, right? They're actually composable. You can put them inside a SQL query and do whatever you want around them.
Qualify them with where clauses and things like that.
Yes.
Welcome back, Arthur.
Yeah, my spell wore off, so I'm no longer a cat.
I prefer the previous look better, but okay. Sorry, no offense.
Thanks, Shay. Love you too.
I always prefer the cats.
Well, I have a chicken on my shirt at least. Anyway.
That helps.
So go ahead, Erik. Sorry.
Yeah. So for the stored procedures, I've actually isolated them in their own class. They're not DB sets, so you can't compose over them, as we discussed multiple times already.
Yeah.
But I have this get procedures extension method. So in your context, you can write get procedures, and then you will get a list of all the mapped procedures from this get procedures static method.
Oh, interesting. So this is like a pattern that I mean, what we've seen up to now is how you would, just write code in EF usually when using it, whereas this is something that you've kind of layered on top, like a sort of a pattern for exposing your stored procedures, which is quite cool.
Yes.
So you don't need to do any work to actually like pass the parameters and put them in SQL and all that kind of stuff.
No, exactly.
That's
It's
very
like
nice.
it's already technically possible to call stored procedures in EF core, and it's been basically since version 1. But there's a lot of pitfalls, and let me tell you bluntly, I've learned a lot about stored procedures during this, and I still encounter bugs in my implementation. So there's a lot of stuff to learn about how to call stored procedures. Stored procedures can actually return 3 types of data in SQL Server. They can both return the result set, which is like the tabular result that you get back. It can return a return value, which is an integer that you get back from all stored procedures. Sometimes it doesn't really mean anything, but you always get a return value back from a stored procedure. And then it can return one or more output parameters. And all those.
There's also in-out parameters, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, yes, there is, and I think that I just treat them as output parameters as well. Yes, but yes, there is in, out, and out, and in. Yes.
Right.
So, but I end up using from SQL, from SQL raw actually. So, so this one is actually not really returning anything. So this is returning a result. So of course I map. I inspect the result from the stored procedure and create a class to map the result, and then I call this special extension method that I have that I include, which is in its DbContexts extensions class. It's actually something that is created by a very smart guy from Microsoft called David Brown, that I have adapted to work with this tooling, and it kind of creates a context on the fly that then executes the stored procedure and does the mapping to this result class I'm passing in. You can inspect the code.
You're using yourself. Ligatures in your code.
Yes, it's
that's a font. That's a nice font.
It's a font called Fira code.
Interesting.
That allows you to show ligatures inside your code. It's it's a question whether it's useful or not. So that
one point that was made.
Sorry, yes, sorry.
Sorry, just one point. That one very good point made by Ray2 in the chat is that in SQL Server, stored procedures can actually return multiple result sets as well. So
that's correct.
Exactly
that's correct.
This comment, and I'll add to that what I've also found, which is even which makes my day even worse, is that stored procedures can actually, if I'm not mistaken, be completely dynamic. So depending on which arguments you pass to it, it's gonna return whatever. Maybe with one parameter, it's gonna return one result set of a particular shape, and with another parameter,
it can return different shapes based on the parameters. So
it's basically like dynamic programming, right?
Yes,
like JavaScript.
Yes. So what I do, I don't support stored procedures that return multiple result sets. It's as simple as that. I only support the first result set from a given stored procedure.
Well, to be fair, I don't think it's much about you, if I'm not mistaken. So you basically wrap from SQL, right? The EF core from SQL, and from SQL itself, unless I'm mistaken, Arthur, we don't really have a way of returning stored procedures with multiple results, right? So the problem is more, it's like a limitation in EF core more than it is in your tool.
Yeah, it's also a limitation in my metadata discovery. I can only discover the first result set of a stored procedure.
Okay, sure.
Metadata discovery
SQL Server allows me to do. So I'm unaware of any additional result sets returned from a stored procedure, unfortunately. And to your other question, which was how do you handle stored procedures that return dynamic results or use temp tables and so on. What I actually do is I create an empty partial class, and then the user, if they know what shape they want returned, they can actually populate another partial class of that class, And so I create a placeholder for the result, but then it will be up to the user themselves to populate the result class with the appropriate properties.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's cool, but it's kind of a workaround.
So I think we're getting well. Actually, we're over time already.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry.
No problem. We can run over a bit. That's fine.
Yeah. I think
like,
that's all I wanted to show, because this is just something else that was a stretch topic, and yes, so surprise, we ran out of time. So how do you get started? Install EF Core Power Tools, of course, in Visual Studio 2019. Point to your database, a dacpac file, or now even an EDMX file. Use the generated code. And if you encounter any issues or have any bright ideas, contact me on GitHub, in the GitHub repository. As you have already learned from watching this, pull request is highly appreciated, and a lot of them are actually put in the product. So bring them on, and feature suggestions, of course, and any cries for help and support are much appreciated, because I really want to learn how people are using this tool and how we can do better.
So absolutely, thanks so much for doing this, Erik. I wanted to kind of wrap it up by bringing it back to the code first and migrations versus the database first. A lot of people talk about database first with EF Core, and Erik in his day job does this, right? He uses a database first workflow with EF Core, and we have the command line tools which are important from a perspective of making sure we have a cross-platform solution. So if you like to develop on Linux like Shay and I do, then you can have a way of doing things on there. But if you're looking for a database first support that is getting close to rivaling what you can do in EF6. It doesn't have a designer, of course, but it still allows you with the config files to get close to being able to say, right, the database is my source of truth. I'm going to run this tool when it changes, but it's going to preserve stuff. So it's really great. When we at the beginning of this, we looked at NodeTime and how the community and the ecosystem is built up around that. I think this stuff that Erik EJ is promoting here is doing the same thing for database first around tooling and Visual Studio for EF Core. And it's so great to see all of the other community people jumping in onto Erik's project and sending PRs and adding stuff. So the more we can encourage that, and like I mentioned earlier, we plan to document this as part of, hey, if you want to do database first, go use the power tools. It's going to be a good experience. So it's really great to see all this coming together, and the ecosystem and the community building a powerful solution on top of what we're doing at Microsoft as well. So great stuff. Anybody have further comments? No? Okay, then I think we can call this. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again, Erik. As always, you're always welcome, as you know. And I don't know what's up in 2 weeks' time, but I'm sure we'll have something very interesting in 2 weeks' time. So we'll see you all again then. Bye.
Take care, everyone.